My aunt announced my miscarriage to 214 people before I had found the courage to tell most of my own family. I was 38 years old, standing near the back wall of Harbor House, the lakeside event hall my father had spent half his life restoring outside Grand Rapids, Michigan. I had returned to work only 12 days after losing the pregnancy because the annual donor dinner could not be moved, and because being useful had always been the safest role in my family. Aunt Valerie lifted the cordless microphone with the strip of burgundy tape around its handle and laughed softly, the way she did when she wanted a room to believe she was being warm. "Before we introduce some exciting changes," she said, "I hope everyone will give Rachel a little grace. She and Ben recently lost their baby, and grief can make people behave in ways they normally would not." My husband went rigid beside me. My mother lowered her eyes. My cousin Paige stared at the stage as if she had already heard the sentence in rehearsal. Then Valerie announced that Paige would be taking over my responsibilities at Harbor House until Rachel became herself again. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not take the microphone away from her. I stayed calm because Valerie believed she had just explained why I no longer belonged in the business. What she did not know was that a repayment deadline was 11 days away, and a signed agreement in my office would decide who actually controlled Harbor House when that deadline passed. If you have ever been expected to stay polite while someone used your pain against you, keep listening. The quiet part of this story mattered more than anything I could have said in that room. My name is Rachel Mercer. I worked full-time as a contracts administrator for a commercial construction company, and for nearly 15 years I had also managed the unglamorous side of Harbor House. I handled vendor agreements, payroll corrections, insurance renewals, booking disputes, liquor license paperwork, and the endless small emergencies that appeared whenever a 100-year-old building was used for weddings, fundraisers, memorials, and corporate dinners. Valerie was my father's older sister. She was 59, attractive in a polished, deliberate way, and gifted at making strangers feel as though they had been personally welcomed into the family. She remembered donors' spouses, bartenders' children, and the names of every bride who had ever cried in the upstairs dressing room. She also had a habit of confusing public affection with private ownership. The donor dinner that January evening was supposed to celebrate the renovation of Harbor House's West Terrace. I had negotiated the masonry contract, reduced the final bill by $19,000, and spent 3 months coordinating the work around booked events. Valerie had selected the table linens and taken photographs beside the finished stonework. That was our arrangement in its simplest form. I made things function. Valerie made sure people saw her near them. When she disclosed my miscarriage, the room did not become dramatically silent. Real humiliation rarely arrives that cleanly. A few people shifted in their chairs. Someone near the bar whispered, "Oh, no." A donor I had known for years pressed her hand to her chest. At table 7, a man continued cutting his chicken because he had not fully understood what Valerie had said. Ben reached for my hand. "We can leave," he said under his breath. I wanted to. My body still felt unfamiliar after the procedure. I had spent the previous week waking before dawn with the irrational certainty that I had forgotten something important, only to remember that what I had lost could not be recovered by making a list. But Valerie was still speaking. "Family takes care of family," she told the room. "That is why Paige has agreed to step forward as interim general manager. Rachel needs time without pressure, and Harbor House needs consistent leadership." Paige stood when Valerie gestured toward her. She wore a green velvet dress and the careful expression of someone accepting an award she had been told might upset another person. She gave a small wave. Applause began in scattered pockets and then spread because people at formal dinners clap when a person on stage pauses. I looked at my mother, Ellen. She was 64 and had perfected the art of asking for peace with her face. Her lips moved around a word I could not hear. Later she would tell me she had been saying, "Please. Not please stop. Please do not make this worse." That distinction had shaped most of my adult life. Valerie finally lowered the microphone. The burgundy tape caught the amber stage light. My father had wrapped that tape around the handle years earlier so staff could identify Harbor House equipment when outside bands brought their own sound systems. After he died, Valerie began carrying that microphone from event to event as though it were a family scepter. I walked to the stage before I could reconsider. Valerie smiled at me, relieved, probably assuming I was about to thank her. I did not touch the microphone. I faced the room and said, loudly enough to carry, my medical history was private. Ben and I will not discuss it tonight. Please enjoy dinner, and thank you for supporting Harbor House. There was no clever line. No speech. I had neither the strength nor the desire to turn my loss into a public contest. Then I stepped down, took Ben's arm, and walked through the side corridor toward my office. Behind us, Valerie resumed the program. That was the first moment I understood how certain she was that I would accept what she had done. She did not follow me. She did not apologize. She did not even pause the dinner. In my office, the old radiator clicked against the cold. Ben closed the door and stood in front of it as if he could physically keep the rest of my family outside. Tell me what you need, he said. I looked at the locked lower drawer of my desk. Inside it was a burgundy folder containing the capital agreement Valerie had signed 5 years earlier, when Harbor House had been one missed payment away from foreclosure. She had called it temporary paperwork then. She had promised the family would repay me long before the conversion clause ever mattered. On the stage beyond the wall, Paige thanked Valerie for believing in her. I placed my palm on the desk and waited for my hand to stop shaking. I need to hear what they say when there isn't an audience, I told Ben. A minute later, someone knocked 3 times. Valerie's voice came through the door. Rachel, sweetheart, we need to talk about Monday. The role I had always played. Monday had always been Valerie's favorite kind of deadline. It was close enough to create panic and far enough away for her to describe the pressure as reasonable. Before I opened the office door, I thought about the first time she had used that tone with me. I was 23 and newly hired at a roofing company. Harbor House had booked 2 weddings on the same Saturday because Valerie had written one date in pencil and entered another into the calendar. She called me at work and said, "Your father is beside himself. I know you will figure it out." I did. I found a nearby botanical center for the afternoon ceremony, convinced both couples that the split arrangement was intentional, arranged transportation, and spent my entire weekend moving flowers between locations. Valerie later told the family that we had all pulled together. That became my position, the person included in the word we only after the problem had been solved. Harbor House had been in our family since my grandfather bought the neglected property in 1978. It sat above a narrow section of Reed's Lake, with dark cedar siding, tall windows, and a ballroom built in the 1920s. My grandfather repaired the roof himself. My father, David, rebuilt the lakeside stairs and converted the carriage house into offices. Valerie handled sales and community relationships. My mother ran the kitchen until arthritis made the long shifts impossible. I grew up folding napkins in the pantry and sleeping on coats during late receptions. Harbor House was never just a business to me. It was the place where my father taught me how to read a tape measure, where my parents celebrated their 25th anniversary, and where we held his memorial after pancreatic cancer took him at 61. That history was the reason I tolerated more than I should have. My father had been kind, hardworking, and deeply uncomfortable with conflict. When Valerie overpromised, he fixed it. When she spent too much, he worked more. When I began doing the same, he thanked me with such visible relief that I mistook relief for closeness. After his death, Valerie started saying, "Your father would want us to keep this together." Sometimes she meant the building. Sometimes she meant the family. Usually she meant that I should absorb the next problem without asking who caused it. I had my own career by then. At Hartwell Construction, I reviewed subcontracts, tracked insurance certificates, and caught the kinds of small wording errors that could cost a company hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was good at details because details behaved predictably. A date either matched or it did not. A signature was present or absent. A payment had cleared or it had not. Family facts were treated differently. They changed according to who felt hurt. Valerie called my work at Harbor House helping out, even during the years I averaged 25 hours a week there. I received a modest management stipend, but it was less than half what the venue would have paid an outside operations manager. Whenever I raised the issue, she reminded me that my mother depended on Harbor House distributions and that Paige was still finding her direction. Paige was 7 years younger than me. She was charming, visually creative, and genuinely talented at making rooms look expensive. She could turn grocery store flowers into elegant centerpieces and persuade a nervous bride that rain photographs were romantic. She also disliked spreadsheets, deadlines, and conversations involving money. Valerie interpreted Paige's preferences as evidence that she belonged in leadership and my competence as evidence that I did not need recognition. Paige is a people person, she would say. You are our steady one. Steady meant I covered the county tax penalty when Valerie forgot to mail a filing. Steady meant I advanced $4,000 for a damaged floor repair because a wedding was 3 days away. Steady meant I spent Christmas morning responding to a burst pipe claim while Paige posted photographs from Aspen. Ben saw the pattern long before I admitted it. We met when I was 31, after his school district hired Harbor House for an awards banquet. He was a middle school counselor with patient eyes and an ability to ask direct questions without making them sound like accusations. On our 4th date, Valerie called because a caterer had failed to provide enough staff for a Saturday wedding. I left before dessert. Ben paid the bill, drove separately to Harbor House, and spent 3 hours carrying trays despite having no obligation to help. On the way home, he said, "Does your aunt ever solve the emergencies she creates?" I laughed because I thought he was joking. He was not. He never demanded that I abandon the business. He understood what Harbor House meant to me and how much of my father remained in its walls. But over the years, he asked me to notice the cost. There was the anniversary trip we shortened because Valerie had not renewed the liquor license on time. There was the Sunday I left Ben alone at urgent care with a fractured wrist because Harbor House's alarm company could not reach anyone else. There were the fertility appointments I scheduled around events even though Paige routinely blocked off entire weekends for social plans. Each sacrifice seemed small while I was making it. Together, they formed a life arranged around other people's convenience. My mother reinforced it without meaning to. Ellen was gentle, anxious, and financially vulnerable after my father died. Her Social Security and small pension covered basic expenses, but the quarterly distribution from Harbor House paid her property taxes and medical co-pays. Valerie knew that. So did I. Whenever I considered stepping back, my mother said some version of, "Just until things settle down." Things never settled down. 5 years before the donor dinner, Harbor House came dangerously close to closing. A spring storm damaged the roof, and an inspection uncovered outdated electrical panels. 2 major events canceled. The bank refused additional financing because the business had already used most of its credit line. Valerie called a family meeting in the ballroom. The cordless microphone sat on the table even though only 6 of us were present. She used it at every gathering, large or small, because she liked meetings to feel official when she was leading them. The venue needed $72,000 within 3 weeks. Valerie proposed selling the carriage house, but the property restrictions made that difficult. Paige suggested an online fundraiser. My mother cried quietly into a napkin. I had received $96,000 from my father's life insurance policy. Ben and I had planned to use part of it for a down payment and keep the rest as security while we tried to have a child. I offered Harbor House $72,000 as a formal capital loan. Ben did not object, but he insisted we involve an attorney. Love can be part of the reason, he said. It cannot be the entire contract. The agreement was not complicated. Harbor House would repay the principal with modest interest over 5 years. If the unpaid balance remained after the final cure date, I could elect to convert the debt into additional membership units, giving me a controlling interest in the company. The other owners, Valerie, my mother, and me, signed an amendment to the operating agreement. The signatures were witnessed and notarized. Valerie barely read it. "We will have you paid off in 2 years," she said. "This is just to make Ben comfortable." The roof was repaired. The electrical work passed inspection. Bookings recovered. The business made irregular payments for the first 18 months and then stopped after Valerie decided the ballroom needed imported light fixtures. Whenever I asked about the balance, she said cash flow was tight and reminded me that my mother's income came first. I kept the original documents in a burgundy folder inside my desk. The color was accidental, but it matched the tape on the microphone so closely that I began associating both objects with the same lesson. In my family, the person holding the symbol of authority was not always the person carrying the risk. By the year of the donor dinner, the final cure date was approaching. Valerie knew the date. I had sent quarterly statements. She had answered each one with assurances that we would address it after the next event season. Then I became pregnant. For 11 weeks, the tiny life Ben and I had wanted for years gave me a reason to imagine a future that did not revolve around Harbor House. I began training a reliable assistant. I reduced my weekend hours. I told Valerie that after the baby arrived, the venue would need to hire a real general manager. She smiled and said she supported me completely. 3 weeks later, I miscarried. 12 days after that, she took the microphone and announced that Paige was replacing me. When I opened my office door after the donor dinner, Valerie stood in the corridor with my mother on one side and Paige on the other. It looked less like a family conversation than a delegation. Valerie entered first. "I know tonight felt uncomfortable," she said. "But we cannot avoid practical decisions because emotions are tender." Ben moved beside me. "You announced our loss to a room full of strangers." Valerie gave him the patient smile she reserved for people she considered dramatic. "They were not strangers. They were supporters of this family. And they needed context." "Context for what?" I asked. Paige looked at the floor. Valerie set a cream-colored envelope on my desk. "For the transition," she said. "We need your decision by Monday morning." The betrayal they thought I would accept. The cream-colored envelope contained a resignation agreement, a voting proxy, and an offer of $10,000. Valerie described the payment as generous. The document described it as full settlement of any claim I might have for unpaid compensation, management authority, or reimbursement of expenses. If I signed, I would resign from all operating duties, assign my voting rights to Valerie for 3 years, and agree not to interfere with Paige's management of Harbor House. The capital loan was mentioned in one paragraph near the end. It said the parties intended to negotiate its resolution in good faith at a later date. Ben read that line twice. "This doesn't resolve the loan," he said. "Correct," Valerie replied. "It keeps separate issues separate." I looked at her. "You want me to surrender my vote now and trust you to deal with $72,000 later." "Not 72. There were payments. The current principal balance is $64,250. Valerie's expression changed for half a second. She did not like that I knew the amount without checking. "Then we will discuss $64,250 when the business can support it," she said. "Tonight is about leadership." My mother sat in the chair across from my desk, twisting the strap of her handbag. "Rachel, maybe you could take a few months. You have been through so much." There was tenderness in her voice, which made the suggestion hurt more. She was not trying to punish me. She was trying to move the tension away from herself, and I had always been the easiest place to put it. "Did you know Valerie was going to announce the miscarriage?" I asked. My mother looked at Valerie before answering. "I knew she wanted people to understand that you needed rest." "That is not what I asked." Her fingers tightened around the handbag strap. I did not know exactly what words she would use. Valerie exhaled. "We are getting distracted." My private medical information is not a distraction. No, it is the reason we are in a difficult position. Ben took one step forward. "The reason you're in a difficult position is that you publicly humiliated my wife and tried to take her authority before the dinner plates were cleared." Paige finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but the words were not apologetic. "I didn't ask Aunt Rachel to lose anything. Mom asked me to help because bookings are slipping and staff are confused." I had been Aunt Rachel to Paige's daughter, Maya. Paige and I were cousins, but she had started using the title after Maya was born. Hearing it in that moment made the room feel even more distorted, as if family language could soften an ambush. "Which bookings are slipping?" I asked. Paige glanced at Valerie. "There have been delays. Emails. People not knowing who is in charge. I have been out 12 days. I answered every urgent email except the morning of my procedure." Valerie held up one hand. "This is precisely why the arrangement is unhealthy. You are counting emails while recovering from a miscarriage. We are trying to protect you." The sentence was skillful. It turned my evidence of reliability into proof that I lacked judgment. For nearly 3 years, Ben and I had tried to have a child. We had endured tests, medication, 2 failed rounds of intrauterine insemination, and the quiet strain of watching our friends' children grow while our spare room remained an office. The pregnancy had happened naturally, unexpectedly, during a month when we had decided to stop tracking everything. We told no one for the first 8 weeks. At 10 weeks, after a reassuring appointment, I told my mother over lunch. I asked her not to tell Valerie or Paige yet. "Of course," she said. "This belongs to you." 4 days later, Valerie called and said, "Your mother slipped, but only because she is so happy." I won't say a word. When the ultrasound showed no heartbeat the following week, I told my mother because I could not bear the idea of her asking cheerful questions later. She cried with me on the phone. Then she asked whether she could tell Valerie because she needed someone to talk to. I said yes on one condition, no one else. Valerie sent a flower arrangement and a text that read, "Your news is safe with me. Take all the time you need." Now, in my office, she acted as though the promise had expired when it became inconvenient. I placed the resignation agreement on the desk. "Here is what I am willing to do," I said. Paige can cover public events for 30 days. I will continue contracts and finance from home. We hire an outside operations consultant to review staffing and workflow. You issue a correction to the board and a written apology for disclosing my miscarriage. No voting proxy. No resignation. Valerie gave a small laugh. "A written apology?" "Yes." "To whom?" "To Ben and me. And a statement to the board that my leave is temporary and voluntary." You want me to undermine Paige after she stepped up for this family. I want you to correct something false. Nothing I said was false. That answer stayed with me. Valerie did not think privacy mattered if the information itself was accurate. In her mind, truth belonged to the person who could make the best use of it. Paige crossed her arms. "A consultant will cost money we don't have. Then we can use some of the $10,000 being offered for my resignation." My mother whispered my name, warning me not to sound sharp. Valerie picked up the agreement and aligned the pages against the desk. "You have until 9 Monday morning," she said. "After that, we will proceed without your cooperation." Proceed how? The staff has already been informed that Paige is acting manager. Vendors will receive updated instructions tomorrow. If you choose to fight every reasonable step, people will draw their own conclusions about your state of mind. Ben said, Is that a threat? It is reality. I turned to Paige. Did you know about the resignation papers before tonight? She hesitated. I knew Mom wanted a clean transition. Did you know she planned to announce the miscarriage? Paige's eyes moved to her mother again. Valerie answered for her. We discussed the program as a family. I looked at my mother. She shook her head quickly. Not with me. Something shifted then. Not enough to make me brave. Not enough to erase the grief or the old instinct to smooth everything over. But enough to make the scene recognizable. They had not gathered to ask what I needed. They had already decided what story would make their decision acceptable. The miscarriage gave them a reason that sounded compassionate. Paige's promotion gave Valerie a solution she wanted anyway. My silence would make the entire arrangement appear mutual. I folded the papers and returned them to the envelope. I will respond Monday, I said. Valerie smiled as though the meeting had ended successfully. Good. Sleep on it. Things will feel less personal in the morning. She walked out with Paige. My mother remained seated. Rachel, she said, I am so sorry about the announcement. But Harbor House cannot survive another family fight. I sat down across from her. Why is it only a family fight when I say no? She blinked several times. That isn't fair. I am asking because I don't know the answer. She stood and reached for my hand. I let her hold it, but I did not reassure her. When she left, Ben locked the office door again. The dinner program continued beyond the wall. A burst of applause followed Valerie's introduction of the terrace donors. I opened the lower drawer and removed the burgundy folder. The original agreement was exactly where I had left it. Beneath it were payment records, annual notices, and a copy of the operating amendment. I had kept everything because that was what I did. Ben sat beside me. Do you know what you're going to do? He asked. No. It was the truth. The conversion clause could give me control after the cure date, but exercising it would affect my mother, employees who had nothing to do with the conflict, and a building tied to every important memory of my father. I was not eager to take over Harbor House. I was tired enough to want freedom from it. The easier choice would have been to sign, accept $10,000, and tell myself I had chosen peace. I almost convinced myself. Then I remembered Valerie saying people would draw conclusions about my state of mind. She was not merely asking me to step away. She was preparing to make any disagreement look like evidence that I was unstable. I put the folder in my work bag. As we left the office, I passed the stage. The cordless microphone rested in its charging cradle. The burgundy tape had begun peeling at one edge. For the first time, it did not remind me of my father. It reminded me of how easily a familiar object could become a weapon when everyone agreed to pretend it was only being used to help. The details that didn't make sense. I spent Saturday morning at our dining room table with the burgundy folder open beside my laptop. Ben made coffee, brought me toast I did not eat, and took his own work to the far end of the table. He understood that when I was frightened, I organized. It was not always healthy, but it was better than pretending I was not frightened at all. I began with the obvious question, was Harbor House truly struggling enough to justify replacing me without warning? The accounting software showed the strongest fall season we had had in 4 years. Deposits were up. Food costs had stabilized after I renegotiated 2 supplier contracts. The terrace renovation had been expensive, but donations covered most of it. Cash flow was tight in January, as it always was, yet there was no operational crisis. Then I noticed a recurring charge of $2,300 labeled brand development. The payments had gone to P. Harper Creative, a limited liability company formed 8 months earlier. Paige's full name was Paige Harper. I searched the vendor files. There was no contract, no scope of work, and no approval recorded in the meeting minutes. There were only 6 invoices using the same vague description: social media strategy, visual positioning, brand elevation. The total was $13,800. Did you know Paige had a company? I asked Ben. He looked up from his laptop. I knew she called herself a consultant online. I didn't know Harbor House was paying her. Neither did I. I continued. Harbor House had leased a black luxury SUV for client transportation, though we had never transported clients. The primary driver on the insurance record was Valerie. The monthly payment was $912. There were also restaurant reimbursements, spa gift cards charged as donor relations, and a $6,000 payment to a photographer for a promotional shoot that featured Valerie and Paige in nearly every image. Some expenses might have been defensible. Together, they revealed a pattern. While Valerie told me the company could not repay my loan, she had been turning business money into status for herself and income for Paige. I pulled the board minutes from the shared drive. The last 3 meetings had been uploaded as scanned PDFs rather than editable documents. On the copy from November, a sentence had been added under management planning: Paige Harper would assume expanded duties in the event Rachel's health or family obligations affected continuity. I had attended that meeting. No such discussion had occurred. The typed sentence was squeezed between 2 legitimate items, and the scanned page did not include initials approving the alteration. I called our outside bookkeeper, a careful woman named Marlene who had worked with Harbor House for 9 years. I did not tell her about the miscarriage announcement. I asked only whether Valerie had requested changes to prior meeting records. Marlene was quiet for long enough that I knew the answer mattered. Valerie emailed a revised November page last week, she said. She said you had forgotten to include a continuity decision. I haven't replaced the original in my files. Please don't. And please send me the email with the attachment. Rachel, am I stepping into something? Not if you preserve the records exactly as you received them. 10 minutes later, the email arrived. Valerie had written, Rachel is dealing with personal health challenges and may not remember every part of the discussion. Please use the corrected page going forward. She had begun creating the record before the donor dinner. I felt a familiar urge to explain it away. Maybe she had convinced herself there had been an informal conversation. Maybe she believed the revised minutes reflected what everyone intended. People rarely wake up and decide to become dishonest in a way they can recognize. They edit the language until the conduct sounds responsible. Ben read the email over my shoulder. This isn't concern, he said. It's preparation. I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen window. Snow had gathered along the fence. 2 houses away, a father pulled a plastic sled while a little boy dragged his boots through the powder. Grief arrived without warning, not as tears at first but as a physical emptiness. The life Ben and I had imagined had disappeared, and my family had turned that disappearance into a management argument. I told my mother because I thought she was safe, I said. Ben came to stand beside me. She may have believed she was safe. That doesn't mean she protected you. The distinction was painful and useful. That afternoon, I searched my Harbor House email archive. Valerie had removed my access to the current inbox, but I still had backups because contracts were retained under our document policy. 3 weeks before the dinner, she had emailed Paige a draft program. The subject line was transition wording. The attachment listed the order of speakers. Beside my name, Valerie had written, briefly acknowledge personal loss so donors understand reduced role. Keep compassionate. Then announce P. Paige replied, are you sure Rachel is okay with people knowing? Valerie answered, "She won't like it, but once said it cannot be unsaid. The room will understand why we had to act." I read those words several times. Once said it cannot be unsaid. The disclosure had not been impulsive. It had been chosen because it was irreversible. Below that exchange was another message about the capital loan. Paige had asked whether my ownership could interfere with the transition. Valerie replied, "The old agreement was written during an emergency and no one expects it to be enforced. We will have her sign the proxy before the deadline." The email answered one question and opened a worse one. Why was Valerie so certain I would sign? The answer was not hidden in the documents. It was in our history. I had accepted partial repayments. I had covered mistakes. I had deferred conversations whenever my mother became anxious. Valerie had years of evidence that I could be pressured by invoking family survival. Sunday afternoon, my mother came to our house without calling. She carried a casserole and looked as though she had not slept. "Valerie says you are reviewing old expenses," she said after Ben went upstairs to give us privacy. "How does she know?" "Marlene told her you requested records." She was concerned. Marlene preserved a document Valerie tried to alter. My mother lowered herself onto the couch. Alter is a strong word. I showed her the original minutes and the revised page. Then I showed her the email about announcing my loss. She covered her mouth. For a moment, I expected clarity. Instead, she said, "Valerie must have been desperate." Desperate for what? To keep the business stable. She has been worried about you. She was planning to remove me before I miscarried. She used the miscarriage to make it easier. My mother looked toward the front window. Paige needs a future too. There it was. Not cruelty. Arithmetic. In our family, I had a job, a husband, a house, and practical skills. Paige had a child, inconsistent income, and a mother who believed security had to be taken when it became available. My competence had been treated as a renewable resource. Paige's uncertainty had been treated as an emergency. Did you know Harbor House was paying Paige $13,800 through her company? I asked. My mother nodded reluctantly. Valerie said it was marketing work. Did you know about the SUV? Another nod. And you still told me there was no money to repay the loan? I thought those were business decisions. Made by whom? She began to cry. I almost moved beside her. I almost told her none of this was her fault. Instead, I handed her a tissue and stayed in my chair. I am going to offer a fair solution, I said. An independent review, repayment terms, and clear roles. I need to know whether you will support that. I support both my daughters. I was her only daughter. Valerie was her sister-in-law, but after 38 years of marriage and widowhood, my mother used family words broadly when precision was inconvenient. That is not an answer. She folded the tissue into smaller and smaller squares. I cannot afford to lose my Harbor House distribution. At last, she had said the fear beneath everything else. I told her I had no intention of taking away her income. I also told her I would not sign the proxy Monday morning. She left the casserole untouched on the coffee table. That evening, I opened a thick envelope that had arrived from the attorney who drafted the capital agreement. I had set it aside during the pregnancy and then forgotten it during the miscarriage. Inside was the annual loan statement, a copy of the conversion procedure, and a reminder that the final cure date was February 1st. The unpaid principal was $64,250. Accrued interest brought the total due to $68,910. Attached to the reminder was a one-page election form. It required only my signature after the deadline. I placed it back in the envelope. I was not ready to sign it. But for the first time, I was ready to let Valerie understand that I might. The truth I could no longer ignore. At 8:45 Monday morning, Valerie sent me a text. Please bring signed documents to the main office. We can put this behind us before staff meeting. I replied, I will be there at 10 to discuss an alternative. Her answer came immediately. There is no alternative that leaves two people in charge. I arrived at Harbor House carrying the burgundy folder and the cream-colored resignation envelope. The lake was gray beneath a low sky. Inside, staff members stopped talking when I passed. Paige's name had already been added to the office door on a temporary brass-colored plaque. Valerie waited in the conference room with Paige and my mother. The cordless microphone lay on a side table beside a stack of donor brochures. No meeting required it. Its presence felt intentional. I placed a written proposal in front of each of them. The proposal was more generous than Ben thought necessary. Valerie would remain public chair of Harbor House and continue donor relations. Paige could serve as events director at a market salary, but her consulting invoices would stop. An independent accountant would review the prior 18 months. The SUV would be returned unless a documented business need existed. The loan balance would be repaid over 24 months, with the first payment due in 30 days. I would continue contract and financial oversight while we hired an experienced general manager through an open process. I also required a written acknowledgement that Valerie had disclosed private medical information without permission and that my authority had not been suspended for health reasons. This protects the business, my mother's distribution, and everyone's employment, I said. It also keeps the current ownership unchanged if the repayment plan is honored. Paige flipped through the pages. So I lose the manager title. You keep a full-time leadership role that matches your experience. I have been doing this my whole life. So have I. Valerie did not read past the first page. An audit is an accusation, she said. An independent review is appropriate when company money has been paid to an owner's daughter without a contract. Paige earned every dollar. Then documentation will confirm that. My mother said, could we remove the word audit? It sounds hostile. Valerie pushed the proposal back toward me. You are using a technical agreement to seize control while everyone is trying to help you. I am offering not to use the conversion right if the debt is repaid under a reasonable schedule. The debt exists because this family let your father build something for you. The statement was so detached from the facts that I needed a moment to answer. I had put my inheritance into Harbor House. I had worked thousands of underpaid hours. Yet Valerie had rearranged the story until I was the beneficiary of everyone else's generosity. My father built it with all of you, I said. That does not make my loan imaginary. Paige leaned forward. This is exactly why Mom thought a transition was necessary. Everything becomes contracts and balances with you. Family businesses need trust. Trust is why I told my mother about the pregnancy. No one spoke. Valerie looked at Paige, then back at me. We are not revisiting Saturday. You don't get to decide that. She stood. Then we are finished. If you do not sign by noon, we will inform staff and vendors that you have resigned voluntarily and are refusing to assist with transition. That would be false. It would be the practical reality. I gathered the proposal without rushing. My hands were cold, but steady. The offer remains open until 5 tomorrow, I said. After that, I will protect my legal and financial interest. Valerie gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You will destroy your mother's income to prove a point. My mother looked at me with immediate fear. That was Valerie's most reliable method. She did not threaten me directly when she could make someone else afraid of my boundary. No, I said. I am the only person in this room who has put in writing that Mom's distribution continues. I left before the conversation could circle back into guilt. Paige followed me into the parking lot. Rachel, wait. She wrapped her coat tightly around herself. Without the conference table between us, she looked younger than 31. I didn't know Mom was going to say it exactly like that at the dinner, she said. You knew she planned to mention the miscarriage. I knew she wanted to explain why you were stepping back. I had not agreed to step back. Paige glanced toward the building. She said you would once everyone understood it was best. And you accepted the job before asking me. Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. I need the job. Maya's father is behind on support. My design work isn't consistent. Mom said this was finally my chance to have something stable. For the first time, I heard the fear beneath her entitlement. It did not excuse her. It made her understandable. I offered you a stable job, I said. You rejected it because it was not control. Mom said the ownership would eventually be adjusted. Adjusted how? Paige hesitated, then pulled out her phone. She opened an email and held it toward me. Valerie had written to her in December, once Rachel signs the proxy, we can restructure before the old loan date. Ellen will support us. Your future should not depend on Rachel's moods. Below it, Paige had asked what percentage she would receive. Valerie answered, enough to make sure you are never pushed aside again. I took a photograph of the email with Paige's permission. Why are you showing me this? I asked. She stared at the snow beside her boots. Because Saturday felt wrong. And because she told me this morning that if you fought us, people needed to know you were not thinking clearly. The phrase was nearly identical to the warning Valerie had given me in my office. Paige had wanted my role. She had benefited from the plan. But she had not understood that Valerie's strategy depended on making my grief look like incapacity. Tell the truth if there is a formal meeting, I said. That is all I am asking. She nodded, though I could see she had not decided whether she was brave enough. At noon, Valerie emailed the staff. The subject line was leadership transition. She wrote that I had chosen to withdraw from daily responsibilities for personal reasons and that Paige would assume management immediately. I replied only to Valerie, my mother, Paige, and the bookkeeper. I have not resigned. Please preserve all records. My written proposal remains open until Tuesday at 5 p.m. Then I contacted the attorney who had drafted the capital agreement. He reviewed the documents and confirmed what I had been afraid to trust. The agreement was enforceable. The operating amendment had been approved by every member. If the balance was not cured by February 1st, I could elect conversion of the debt into membership units sufficient to give me 55% of the voting interest. After conversion, I could call a member meeting and replace the managing member by majority vote. There was no instant takeover and no magic signature. Notices had to be delivered correctly. The company had a right to cure. The ownership records had to be updated. Any action I took would be reviewed closely because family disputes often produced claims of coercion or misunderstanding. The attorney also warned me that authority would not repair the relationships. You may win the governance issue and still lose the family you thought you had, he said. I appreciated the honesty. Tuesday at 4:52, Valerie emailed her response to my fair proposal. Rejected in full. Your demands are financially irresponsible and emotionally retaliatory. For the protection of Harbor House, you are instructed to surrender passwords, files, keys, and all company property by Friday. At 5:12, my mother called. Valerie says you are trying to take the building. I offered a repayment plan that kept ownership exactly as it is. She rejected it. She feels cornered. I felt cornered when she announced my miscarriage to 200 people. My mother began crying. I cannot be in the middle. I had heard that sentence throughout my life. It always meant she had already moved toward the person most likely to punish her. Then don't be in the middle, I said. But please stop asking me to stand there alone. She ended the call soon after. That night, I removed Harbor House email from my phone. I did not delete records or block anyone. I simply stopped performing unpaid emergency work after being ordered to surrender my role. At 2:13 in the morning, the venue's refrigeration alarm sent a warning. Valerie called 3 times. Paige texted, "Do you know the reset code?" I lay awake beside Ben, staring at the ceiling. Every part of me wanted to answer. A broken refrigerator could ruin thousands of dollars in food. Staff had done nothing wrong. My competence rose like a reflex. Ben did not tell me what to do. I called the facility manager, whose number was posted in the emergency binder I had created. He handled the problem in 20 minutes. The food was safe. No disaster occurred because I refused to rescue Valerie personally. That small fact mattered. The next morning, I understood the truth I could no longer ignore. Harbor House had not depended on my endless availability because no alternative existed. It had depended on it because I kept making exploitation efficient. The line I finally drew. On January 25, I sent formal notice that the capital balance remained unpaid and that the cure period would end February 1. The letter did not accuse Valerie of theft or mention the donor dinner. It listed the amount due, quoted the signed agreement, and repeated my repayment offer one final time. Valerie responded through an attorney. Her letter claimed the loan had been intended as a family contribution and that conversion would violate my father's wishes. The attorney who had drafted the agreement produced his file notes. Valerie had negotiated the interest rate herself. She had requested the 5-year term. She had insisted on language allowing early repayment without penalty. Her own handwritten comments appeared in the margin beside the conversion clause. There was no honest misunderstanding left to hide behind. Ben and I spent the evening before the deadline in our kitchen. The one-page election form lay between us. "I keep thinking about my mother," I said. "You protected her distribution in every proposal," he replied. "You cannot protect her from being unhappy with you." That was the line I had avoided my entire life. I could prevent financial harm. I could be fair. I could leave room for repair. But I could not make a boundary painless for people who benefited from its absence. At 11 the next morning, my mother came to the house carrying the burgundy folder. I had left it with the attorney after our meeting, and he had given her a copy of one page at her request, the signature page from 5 years earlier. "I signed this," she said. "I remember being relieved that you saved us." I also remember Valerie saying we would never let it reach the deadline. It reached the deadline because every time I asked, everyone chose something else. She nodded. I was afraid if I admitted that, I would have to choose. "You did choose, Mom. You chose not to upset her." She cried, but she did not deny it. At 4 p.m. on February 1, the account had not been cured. I signed the election form and authorized delivery to every member. The next morning, I called a formal meeting for Friday at Harbor House. Valerie announced that she would address the staff first. When I entered the ballroom that Friday, she was already standing near the stage with the burgundy-taped microphone in her hand. The day everything changed. Valerie spoke for 6 minutes before the member meeting officially began. She told the staff that grief had changed me, that outside lawyers were attacking a family institution, and that she had tried to protect both Harbor House and my privacy. The last claim was so brazen that several people looked toward me. I let her finish. Then I asked Marlene to distribute the ownership statement prepared after the conversion. The document showed the original loan, the missed cure date, the signed operating amendment, and my new 55% voting interest. Valerie tightened her grip on the microphone. "This is a technical ambush," she said. "No," I answered. "It is the agreement you signed 5 years ago, after I contributed $72,000 to prevent foreclosure. I offered a 2-year repayment plan last week. You rejected it. I did not list every personal expense to the staff. I stated only that an independent review had identified unsupported transactions and that access to company funds would be limited while the review continued. As majority member, I made 3 motions. The first removed Valerie as managing member. The second appointed an experienced interim manager from outside the family for 90 days. The third protected my mother's regular distribution unless ordinary business conditions required an equal reduction for all members. Marlene recorded the votes. My 55% was enough. Valerie raised the microphone again and said, "Everyone should understand that Rachel is doing this after a pregnancy loss. She is not herself." That was the second time she used my miscarriage as evidence against me. This time, I walked to the stage and held out my hand. For several seconds, she refused. Then Paige stood from the front row. "Mom," she said, "give it to her." Valerie released the microphone. The burgundy tape felt rough beneath my fingers. I had watched her use that microphone for years to define what the family had supposedly agreed upon. Holding it did not make me powerful. It made me responsible for saying only what was necessary. "My medical history is not a management tool," I said. I stayed quiet at the donor dinner because I would not turn a private loss into entertainment. I am speaking now because silence has been presented as consent. It was not. I explained that Valerie had planned the disclosure before the event, altered a meeting record, and attempted to obtain my voting proxy before the loan deadline. Paige confirmed the email sequence. My mother confirmed that I had never authorized the announcement. No one applauded. This was not that kind of victory. Some employees looked angry. Some looked embarrassed. Others studied the floor because their jobs were tied to the people confronting each other. Valerie called the documents cruel and accused Paige of betrayal. Paige began crying but did not withdraw her statement. I offered Valerie one final option. She could remain as honorary community chair, without financial authority, if she signed a repayment agreement for unsupported personal charges and agreed not to discuss my medical information publicly again. She refused. "I will not ask permission to care about my own family," she said. "Then you cannot represent the business," I replied. She left through the side doors without her coat. The review eventually identified $27,600 in unsupported or personal expenses, including Paige's undocumented consulting payments. I did not pursue criminal charges. Valerie signed a civil repayment agreement after her attorney advised her that the records were clear. The SUV was returned. Paige's consulting arrangement ended, but the interim manager offered her a salaried event coordinator position. She declined and found work with a hotel group 3 months later. Harbor House did not collapse. It was strained, awkward, and less glamorous for a while. It was also better organized. Staff received written job descriptions. Family members needed contracts like everyone else. The altered minutes remained in the audit file beside the originals. At the first wedding after the meeting, I saw the burgundy-taped microphone resting near the bandstand. For a moment, I could hear Valerie's voice in my memory. Then the bride's grandfather used it to give a nervous, loving toast. The object had not betrayed me. A person had. That distinction helped me begin letting it go. What remained afterward? 6 months later, Harbor House was profitable again, but the family was not repaired. Valerie made the first 3 repayment installments through her attorney and then stopped sending messages except those required by the agreement. She did not attend my mother's birthday dinner. She sent flowers without a card. I sometimes missed the version of her who had remembered every school recital and taught me how to arrange roses. Missing that version did not require me to invite the other one back into authority. My mother and I began having breakfast twice a month. Eventually she admitted sharing my pregnancy for Valerie's comfort, then staying silent because she feared losing income and family standing. "I kept calling it peace," she said, because fear sounded worse. I appreciated the honesty, but forgiveness did not arrive all at once. Trust returned in smaller amounts, attached to what she did rather than what she promised. Ben and I kept the spare room as an office. We were not ready to make decisions about trying again. Grief became less sharp, though never irrelevant. Most importantly, it became ours again. I hired a professional general manager and reduced my harbor house hours. I remained majority owner, but I stopped treating constant availability as proof of love. My father's legacy was not the building alone. It was also the care he put into work, and care without boundaries had nearly taught everyone around me that I did not have any. The old microphone is still used at Harbor House. The peeling burgundy tape was replaced with a simple printed label. At an employee dinner that summer, I held it briefly to thank the staff. I did not mention Valerie, the audit, or the miscarriage. I said that privacy, clear agreements, and respect were not obstacles to family. They were what made closeness safe. Then I handed the microphone to someone else. Staying calm did not mean I was unaffected. It meant I refused to let my aunt choose the meaning of my pain or the terms of my silence. Sometimes the most mature form of forgiveness is not reconciliation. It is accepting what someone has shown you and building a life that no longer requires them to change. Would you have given Valerie one more chance after the public apology she refused to make, or would you have drawn the same line I did?